My partner and I were traveling through Europe on a budget, staying in small hostels wherever we could. Most were fine, clean enough, basic and cheap, but one in particular, I wish we'd never set foot in that place. It was a small hostel in a quiet village far off the tourist trail. The manager was an older man, polite enough. The place looked decent for the price, and we were the only guest, which we thought was a bonus. We had a private room on the second floor. Everything was good. That changed on the second night. Around midnight, we started hearing noises, faint banging, muffled cries, and what sounded like chains rattling. We assumed it was something outside, but it was coming from below us. We mentioned it to the manager the next morning, but he just brushed us off. He said the building was old and noises like that were normal. When we pressed further, he became defensive and told us to stay away from the basement. That raised some red flags, but we decided not to push it. That night, the noises got worse. The banging was louder, more frantic, and we could hear distinct voices, pleading, sobbing. It sounded like someone was trapped down there. We couldn't ignore it any longer. Despite the manager's warning, we decided to investigate. We waited until he left the front desk, then found the door to the basement. It was locked, but the key was in the front desk drawer. The basement was dark and smelled like damp earth and mildew. As we descended the creaky wooden stairs, the noises grew louder. What we found at the bottom made my stomach drop. It was a prison. Not a proper one, but a makeshift setup with metal cages lining the walls. Inside were people, men and women of various ages, all looking terrified and malnourished. Some were chained, others huddled in corners, too weak to move. The sight was horrifying. They saw us and immediately started pleading for help. Some couldn't even speak properly, just moaning and reaching out through the bars. We had no idea what to do. Before we could figure it out, we heard the door at the top of the stairs slam shut. The manager was standing there glaring down at us. He had something in his hand. It looked like a club or a heavy stick. My heart sank. We ran. I don't even remember making the decision. We just bolted, weaving through the cages and towards what looked like another exit at the far end. The manager shouted after us, his footsteps pounding on the stairs as he gave chase. The basement wasn't just a single room. It led to a series of tunnels, dimly lit and barely wide enough for two people to walk side by side. We didn't know where we were going, but we kept running. Eventually, we found an old metal door. By some miracle, it wasn't locked. We pushed it open and found ourselves outside in a forest behind the hostel. We kept running until we reached the village. The locals didn't believe or understand us, but someone must have called the authorities because the next day the hostel was swarming with police. We stayed long enough to give our statements, but they wouldn't tell us much about what they found. We later learned through the news that the hostel had been part of some human trafficking operation. The manager and several others were arrested, but not everyone in the cages survived. I don't know if it was starvation, sickness, or something worse. I still have nightmares about it. Those people were down there suffering while we were just meters away sleeping comfortably in our room. And I keep wondering what would have happened if we hadn't escaped. Would we have ended up in one of those cages? I used to be a doctor, but after what happened, I'm not sure I'll ever practice medicine again. I was sent to a small farming community a few months ago to investigate a strange illness. It was supposed to be a quick job, diagnose, treat and leave. Instead, I walked into a nightmare. The town was quiet when I arrived. The people I met were pale and sluggish, with bloodshot eyes and trembling hands. I thought it was a bad flu outbreak. But then I noticed something off about their behavior. They avoided direct eye contact, moved strangely, and reacted to loud noises like startled animals. I quickly realized this wasn't any illness I'd seen before. Whatever it was, it spread fast. Every day, more people fell sick. By the end of the week, nearly half the town was affected. Some of the infected became violent, attacking neighbors and even family members. The local water supply turned out to be the culprit. It was contaminated by runoff from a nearby field of experimental crops. These crops weren't supposed to be in use yet. A big biotech company had been testing them illegally. I planned to alert the authorities, but before I could, the military arrived. They sealed the town off completely. Soldiers set up barricades around the perimeter, and no one was allowed to leave. They shut down the power grid and cut all communication, phones, internet. Everything went dark. It was as if the town had been erased. The healthy residents panicked, trying to plead with the soldiers to let them out. No one listened. The infected grew worse. Their skin took on a greyish tone, they moved jerky and erratic, and they started losing the ability to speak. By then, it was clear they weren't just sick, they were changing. I tried to help as many people as I could, but supplies ran out quickly. Medicines, food, clean water, it was all gone within days. The infected began attacking anyone who wasn't like them. They moved in packs, hunting down the few of us who were still healthy. It wasn't like the zombie films you see on telly. These weren't mindless creatures. They were smarter, more cunning. They set traps, used tools, and worked together. The worst part was recognizing some of them, people I'd met and spoken to when I first arrived. Seeing their faces twisted with rage and hunger still haunts me. The military didn't just leave us to die, they made sure we couldn't escape. I saw soldiers shooting anyone who got too close to the barricades, infected or not. Once I tried to sneak out through a drainage tunnel, but it was rigged with explosives. They weren't taking any chances. I don't know how I survived. I spent weeks hiding in basements and barns, scavenging whatever I could find. I lost track of time, lost track of everyone I'd met. The town became silent, except for the occasional cries of the infected. Eventually, I stumbled upon an abandoned military supply drop. It wasn't much, just some rations which kept me going for a little longer. One night, a few crop planes flew over the town, spraying a mist. It covered everything. Every street, every house was filled with this mist. I remember nothing after that, only just waking up in a military hospital tent. I was examined for weeks, maybe, probably to determine if I was still human. I have no idea how long I was held in the end, but eventually I was let go, just thrown on the streets and threatened to tell no one, but I can't hold back. People need to know this happened. I've been into urban exploration for years. There's a thrill to it, finding forgotten places, piecing together their stories. But after what happened at Ashcroft Asylum, I don't think I'll ever step foot in an abandoned building again. Ashcroft was one of those places you hear about on forums but don't believe actually exists. Built in the 1800s, it was closed down in the 70s after rumors of abuse and inhumane practices. The perfect target for an exploration. There were 6 of us. We met up late at night to avoid drawing attention, armed with torches, cameras, and an overinflated sense of confidence. Getting in was easy enough. The chain on the front gate was rusted through and the main doors had long been kicked in. Inside the place was a time capsule. Peeling wallpaper, smashed medical equipment, and graffiti from other explorers covered the walls. We started poking around, splitting into pairs to cover more ground. The first floor was mostly empty offices and storage rooms, nothing too exciting. But the second floor was where things started to get off. In one of the larger rooms, we found old patient files scattered across the floor. Most of them were illegible, water-damaged beyond recognition, but a few were still readable, and what we saw made my stomach churn. Detailed notes on experiments, chemical injections, sensory deprivation, surgeries that had no medical purpose. One file even mentioned reconditioning through isolation and torture. We should have left right then and there, but curiosity got the better of us. One of the group, Charlie, found a basement staircase partially hidden behind a fallen beam. We all squeezed through, descending into the darkness. The basement was worse. Chains hung from the walls, and there were cells, actual cells, no bigger than cupboards. A thick, cloying smell of mildew and decay lingered in the air. That's when we heard the first scream. It came from upstairs, sharp. We froze, thinking someone else had entered the asylum. Then the dragging started, a slow, wet sound like something heavy being pulled across the floor. When we called out for our friend Riley, who'd been in another part of the building, there was no answer. We scrambled back upstairs to find Riley, but he was gone. His torch lay smashed on the floor in one of the hallways, flickering weakly. Panic set in. We decided to stick together, no more splitting up, and head straight for the exit. But the asylum wasn't going to let us go so easily. Doors that had been open earlier were suddenly locked. Corridors twisted and stretched into places we didn't remember. One by one, we started losing people. Claire was the next to vanish. 1 second she was walking behind us. The next she let out this blood-curdling scream and was dragged into the shadows. We searched for her, but all we found was a smear of something dark leading down another hallway. The rest of us broke into a full sprint, desperate to find a way out. That's when we saw them. Shadows shifting just at the edge of the torchlight. They weren't human, not anymore. emaciated figures with hollow eyes and twisted limbs, their mouths silently screaming. They moved towards us with jerky motions. I don't know how we managed it, but me and Charlie found a broken window on the ground floor. We scrambled through it, tearing our clothes on the glass. The others didn't make it. We heard their screams echoing behind us, the dragging sound following close behind. We ran for what felt like hours until we reached the car. Neither of us spoke a word as we drove back to the city. When we finally checked our phones, it was as if no time had passed. The timestamp showed we'd only been inside the asylum for 15 minutes. The others were never found. We tried reporting it to the police, but the search found nothing, not even Riley's smashed flashlight on the floor. Ashcroft remains abandoned, but I know better than to believe it's empty. If you're into caving or spelunking, maybe it'll serve as a warning. Some places aren't meant to be explored. A few months ago, I joined a group of friends for a caving expedition. We're all experienced. The plan was to explore a newly discovered cave system in a remote part of the country. It had no official name, just GPS coordinates passed around online. When we arrived, it looked unremarkable. Just a narrow entrance hidden in a rocky outcrop. But once inside, the passage opened into a vast series of chambers and tunnels. It was unlike anything we'd seen before. Intricate formations, underground streams, and silence. The first few hours were thrilling. We marked our path with chalk and glow sticks, took photos, and marveled at the untouched beauty of the caverns. We kept going deeper. It began with the markings. We thought they were from another group, old chalk arrows pointing in different directions, but they didn't make sense. Some pointed into solid walls, others circled back on themselves. Then we found an abandoned torch, old and rusted, with no sign of its owner. That's when we remembered the stories. Over the years, there'd been rumors of explorers who went missing in this area, but no one had ever found their bodies or figured out what happened. Still, we pressed on. The air grew colder, the walls slick with moisture. We found a torn backpack wedged in a crevice, its contents strewn about. A journal inside was so waterlogged it was unreadable, but the date on the cover was from 6 years ago. Then came the noise. It was subtle, scraping sounds, like rock against rock. We thought it might be loose debris, but it grew louder the deeper we went. Echoes bounced around the tunnels, making it impossible to tell where the sounds were coming from. We tried to ignore it, but then we found the bones. They were scattered all over the place, but we could tell among the animal bones were human bones. Panic set in when our glow sticks started disappearing. We'd leave one behind to mark our path, only to find it gone when we tried to retrace our steps. The noises turned into whispers, faint and incomprehensible, but unmistakably there. At one point, I swear I saw a shadow move against the glow of my torch, even though there was no one ahead of me. That's when we knew we had to get out now. But the path we came through didn't lead us to the exit. It spiraled back into another chamber, larger than the rest. In the center was a pile of equipment, helmets, ropes, and clothes, all covered in dust and mold. Among them were our glow sticks. We weren't alone. The scraping sound returned, louder. It was claws or nails dragging against stone. My torch flickered, and for a split second I saw something, a figure hunched and pale, with elongated limbs and a face that didn't look human. It moved fast, disappearing into the shadows before I could react. We ran, or tried to. The tunnels twisted, leading us in circles. Every time we stopped to catch our breath, the whispers grew louder. One by one, my friends started disappearing. I'd hear a scream, then nothing. Eventually, it was just me. I don't know how I made it out. One moment I was stumbling through the darkness, and the next I was crawling out of the entrance into the daylight. I don't remember much after that, just that I woke up in hospital dehydrated and bruised. The rescue teams found no trace of my friends, nor any evidence of the things we saw. They chalked it up to an accident, saying we got lost and I was lucky to survive. But I know what I saw. We live on a small corn farm, just my wife, our daughter, and our dog. It was a normal day like any other, sunny and peaceful until everything changed. Our dog, he is usually calm, but out of nowhere he went ballistic, barking at something outside near the cornfield. I looked out but didn't see anything, just the endless rows of corn swaying in the breeze. I thought maybe it was a fox or a deer, so I let the dog out. He bolted straight for the field, barking like mad. I grabbed a torch and ran after him. I could hear him barking deeper in the field, so I pushed through the stalks, shouting his name. When I finally caught up to him, he was standing rigid, barking at something I couldn't see. I grabbed his collar, calming him down, and turned to head back to the house. That's when I saw through the gaps in the corn I could see the upstairs window of our house. A figure standing in the top hallway. It was tall and humanoid and dark, like it absorbed the light around it. I froze for a moment, my heart in my throat. Then it started moving, heading towards my daughter's room. I screamed her name and ran as fast as I could back to the house, the dog racing ahead of me. I don't think I've ever moved so fast. I burst through the door, up the stairs, and into her room expecting, I don't even know what. But she was there, sound asleep in bed. Alone. I checked the wardrobe, under the bed, even behind the curtains. Nothing. She woke up groggily and asked what was going on. I was shaking, but I just scooped her up and carried her downstairs. My wife was in the living room, looking concerned and confused. I explained what I'd seen, stumbling over my words, trying to make sense of it myself. She kept telling me I must have imagined it. Then the lights went out. Everything plunged into darkness, and the dog started barking again, this time at the back door. It was a different kind of bark, fearful, almost desperate. I grabbed my torch again, but before I could turn it on, a blinding light filled the room. It was like nothing I'd ever seen before, impossibly bright, yet cold, and it came with a high-pitched screech that made my ears feel like they were going to burst. I shielded my eyes and tried to grab hold of my daughter, but I couldn't see or hear anything properly. The light faded just as suddenly as it had come, and when I could see again, she was gone. The room was silent. No light, no sound, just the dog whimpering and my wife screaming her name. We tore the house apart, searched the fields, called the police, but it was useless. She was just gone. The police couldn't explain it. They said there was no sign of forced entry, no sign of struggle. It's been weeks now, and there's been no word, no trace of her. Every night I replay it all in my head, trying to figure out what happened, what I could have done differently. The farm is quiet, and I keep catching shadows out of the corner of my eye, but when I look, there's nothing there. I don't know if I'll ever see her again. I've never shared this before, but it's been haunting me for years. I'm no longer in the medical field, and I think writing this out might help me cope, or at least let someone know what happened. I used to work as a surgeon. It was my life. The long hours, the constant pressure, the sheer weight of responsibility, it consumed me, but I loved it. Until I made a mistake that I could never take back. It was a typical day in the operating theatre, packed with back-to-back surgeries. We were running behind schedule and the team was stretched thin. A patient was prepped and brought into the theatre while I was finishing my notes from the previous case. When I walked in, I glanced at the chart, confirmed the procedure with the scrub nurse, and we began. It was supposed to be a routine appendectomy. Straightforward, in and out, nothing unusual. But as I started the incision, I noticed something. The anatomy didn't match up. I kept going, thinking maybe it was just a variance. It wasn't until I was deep into the procedure that I realized we weren't even in the right ballpark. Panic set in. My stomach dropped as I checked the patient's chart again. My heart stopped. It was the wrong name. The wrong patient. I'd just opened up someone who didn't even need surgery. I froze for what felt like an eternity, staring at the incision I'd made. My scrub nurse noticed something was wrong and asked if we should stop, but I couldn't let this get out. The hospital board, the lawsuits, the media, it would have destroyed my career. I decided to finish the surgery, pretending it was necessary. I rationalized it, told myself that the patient wouldn't remember anything because they were under anesthesia. I sutured them up, wrote falsified notes in the chart to match the procedure I'd just performed, and prayed no one would question it. But things didn't go as planned. The patient developed complications. Post-op pain, infection, things that couldn't easily be explained. They were admitted for days, longer than anyone had expected. Every time their chart was brought up, I felt like my chest was caving in. I avoided their room, sent junior staff to check on them, anything to keep my distance. Then the patient started asking questions. They couldn't understand why they were in so much pain, or why no one could give them a straight answer. It didn't stop there. Their family got involved. They demanded meetings, reports, second opinions. The hospital began an internal review. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw their face, pale and confused, lying in that hospital bed. It got worse when the patient began complaining about sensations. They claimed they could feel things moving inside them. No one took it seriously, but I knew I hadn't been as careful as I should have during the procedure. One night, the patient disappeared. The nurses found their bed empty during routine checks. A full search of the hospital turned up nothing. The CCTV footage showed them wandering the halls in their hospital gown, clutching their abdomen, looking frantic, and then nothing. They just vanished. The hospital closed the case quickly. They blamed mental instability, hinted the patient had walked out of the building, and disappeared on their own. The family wasn't satisfied, but there was no evidence to prove otherwise. I tried to move on, I really did, but strange things started happening. Late at night, when the theatre was empty, I'd hear footsteps echoing down the halls. Surgical instruments would go missing and turn up in places they shouldn't be. One time I found a scalpel in my locker even though I hadn't been in surgery that day, and then there were the dreams. Dreams of the patient lying on the table staring at me wide awake but unable to move. Their eyes would follow me as I worked, and when I tried to look away they'd whisper, "Why?" I left the hospital a year later. I told people it was burnout, but the truth is I couldn't stay there anymore. I felt like they were still watching me, waiting for me to make another mistake. I used to work in a mining operation way out in the middle of nowhere. It was a small, tight-knit crew, just a handful of us living and working together at the site. The isolation was tough, but the pay made it worthwhile. At least that's what I thought until everything went sideways. We were excavating in a section of the mine that hadn't been touched for years, trying to meet some ridiculous quota from the higher-ups. That's when we stumbled across it, a vein of ore none of us had ever seen before. It wasn't gold, silver, or anything valuable looking. It was dark, almost black, with these faint streaks of iridescent green running through it. We thought we'd hit the jackpot, something rare enough to make us all rich. The geologists on site didn't recognize it either, which only added to the excitement. Samples were sent off to the lab, but we didn't wait for results to start digging it out. The bosses wanted tons of it, and we were eager to deliver. The first week was fine, normal work. Then things started to get strange. It began with headaches, not your average run-of-the-mill kind, but pounding, skull-splitting pain that made it hard to think. Some of the guys started complaining about nausea too, and a few even took a day or two off. We all thought it was just the stress or maybe something in the air, dust, fumes, whatever. Then came the hallucinations. It was little things, movement out of the corner of your eye, shadows that shouldn't be there, but it got worse. One guy swore he saw someone standing at the edge of the tunnel, just staring at him. When he got closer, no one was there. Another claimed he saw his brother, who has passed away years ago. We started snapping at each other over stupid things. Missing tools, breaks that went too long, petty arguments. Normally we were a close crew, but suddenly it felt like we couldn't stand to be around each other. One night I woke up to screaming. Two of the guys had gotten into a fight over something trivial, and it turned violent fast. By the time we pulled them apart, one of them had a broken nose and the other was bleeding from a nasty cut on his arm. The next morning they couldn't even remember what had started it. The lab results finally came back, but they didn't make much sense. The ore was laced with some kind of compound that wasn't on any of the geologists' charts. They theorized it might be radioactive or poisonous, but we were so deep in the project that stopping wasn't an option. That's when the real madness set in. One guy completely lost it and started swinging a pickaxe at the walls, screaming about getting it out. Another locked himself in his quarters, muttering about how we were all going to die down there. People began disappearing into the tunnels and not coming back. By the time I realized how bad it was too late. Everyone was paranoid, watching each other like hawks. Tools went missing, accidents started happening. I'll never forget the sight of one of the guys standing over a collapsed body, his face twisted in a mix of fear and rage, blood dripping from his hands. I managed to get out, but only because I left when the rest of the crew wasn't paying attention. I drove for hours before I could even think straight enough to figure out what had happened. The mine was shut down not long after that. Officially, they blamed the violence on stress and overwork. They never released the full findings about the ore, but I know what I saw and what it did to us. I don't even know how to start this. It all started as one of those bucket list experiences. A group of us, all friends from uni who'd done well for ourselves, decided to rent a luxury yacht for a weekend. It wasn't just any yacht either. This thing was massive, with multiple decks, private cabins, and a hot tub. The plan was to sail out to international waters, away from the noise of the world, and just let loose. The first day was incredible. Sun, sea, endless drinks. The crew was polite, but mostly kept to themselves. It was like living in a music video. Everything felt unreal. Then, that night, things started to go wrong. The engine failed out of nowhere. It wasn't a gradual slowdown or anything, it just stopped. 1 second we were gliding smoothly, and the next we were dead in the water. The lights flickered but stayed on, so we didn't panic right away. We assumed the crew would sort it out, except they didn't. We went looking for them, but the crew was gone. Every single one of them. Their cabins were empty, their personal belongings still there. Even the smaller lifeboats were still attached to the yacht, so it didn't make any sense. As the hours dragged on, the mood shifted. Someone suggested we check the radio, but it wasn't working either. No signal, no response, nothing. That's when fear started to creep in. The next day was worse. The sun rose, but the sense of isolation only grew. There was no land in sight, no other boats, just endless water in every direction. We tried to keep spirits up, turning on the music, swimming in the sea, but it all felt hollow. Then we found blood. It was in the engine room, smeared across the floor and walls. Not a lot, but enough to send chills down our spines. None of us could figure out what had happened. There was no sign of a struggle, no bodies, just blood. By that night, everyone was paranoid. Every creak of the yacht felt sinister. We started hearing noises, footsteps on the deck, the sound of something dragging. But whenever we checked, no one was there. One of the group, James, swore he saw someone standing at the edge of the deck, staring out at the water. But when he approached, they disappeared over the side. None of us heard a splash. By the third day, we were falling apart. People were snapping at each other, accusing one another of knowing more than they let on. Food and water were running low. The noises continued, louder now and more frequent. That night we tried to stay together, locking ourselves in the main cabin, but it didn't help. The doors rattled, the lights flickered, and the temperature dropped. We heard someone, or something, outside. When morning came, 2 of our group were gone. Their things were still in the room, but they were missing. There was no sign of a struggle, no clue as to what had happened. I don't remember much about the last night. It's a blur of screams, shadows, and cold. I woke up on a fishing vessel, half-conscious, dehydrated, and sunburned. The fishermen said they found me floating on a piece of debris miles away from any major shipping lanes. I was the only one they picked up. The yacht? Gone? The authorities eventually found the yacht floating with no one on board. Everyone is still missing. I never thought I'd end up writing one of these, but here we are. I don't know how long I have, so I'm just going to lay it all out. Maybe someone will find this when it's all over, if it ever ends. It started a month ago. The global blackout. 1 second, everything was fine. TV on, phone charging, the usual, and the next, it was all gone. Every power source. No lights, no phones, no internet. Even the cars just stopped. At first, everyone thought it was some massive solar flare or an EMP attack. People panicked, of course, looting and screaming in the streets. But it wasn't until the drones appeared that we realized it was something else entirely. The first ones were spotted on the second day. They were unlike anything we'd ever seen, sleek, silent, and fast. They moved in groups, scanning the ground with these eerie blue lights. No one knew where they came from. The drones didn't just patrol, they marked people. If the blue light stopped on you for more than a few seconds, a mark would appear on your skin. It didn't hurt, just this faint outline, like a brand. But the real horror came later. Those marks started disappearing. It seemed random. One person would be there one night, gone the next morning. No struggle, no noise, just gone. Then we realized it wasn't random at all. It was always a week after they'd been marked. Exactly 7 days. People tried everything to stop it, scrubbing the marks, burning them off, even cutting the skin where it appeared. It didn't matter. Once you were marked, it was over. We formed groups trying to protect each other. Safety in numbers, right? Except it didn't work. The drones always found a way. They'd hover outside windows, slip through cracks, even rip through barricades if they had to. When they came for someone, no one could stop them. I watched it happen to a man named Eric in our group. His mark started glowing brighter on the last day. He begged us not to let him go, but what could we do? The drones descended, their blue lights piercing through the darkness. When they left, so had he. We don't know where they take the marked, no bodies, no clues, nothing, just this crushing emptiness. And now it's my turn. I don't know how they chose me. Maybe it's random, maybe it's something else. All I know is that 2 hours ago I saw the light. I froze. The mark appeared on my forearm, faint and glowing, just like the other. I have 6 days left. I thought about running, but where would I go? The drones are everywhere, and the blackouts mean no one outside the affected areas even knows what's happening. For all I know, it's the whole world. The worst part is the waiting, knowing it's coming. I keep staring at the mark, wondering if there's a way to fight back, but deep down I know there isn't. If you're reading this and you haven't seen the drones yet, consider yourself lucky. If you do see them, don't look up, don't let the light find you. And if you're marked, I'm sorry, there's no escaping it. I'll write more if I can, but if this is my last post, just know I tried. I tried to survive, I tried to hold on to hope, but the drones don't leave survivors. It was a dumb idea. Something to impress my mates. We were hanging out at the shopping centre before it closed, mucking about when I suggested locking myself inside overnight. It seemed like a laugh at the time, a stupid challenge to prove I wasn't scared. I had a little backpack with snacks and my phone, so I felt prepared enough. They dared me to do it, and I didn't back down. When the mall staff were finishing up for the night, I slipped into a toilet cubicle and waited until it was silent. Once I was sure the coast was clear, I came out and started wandering around. It was surreal seeing the place empty. Normally it's packed with shoppers, but now it was just me. I spent the first hour or so having a laugh. I slid down the escalators, tried on hats in one of the stores, and even helped myself to a fizzy drink from the food court. Everything felt harmless. It was around midnight when I first noticed something weird. I was messing around in one of the department stores when I realized a mannequin had shifted slightly. I was sure it had been facing the other way when I walked past. I nervously laughed it off. As I moved to another part of the store, I saw another mannequin. This one wasn't just slightly different, it had definitely moved. Its arm was extended, almost like it was pointing at me. My stomach dropped. That's when I heard the faintest shuffle, like something dragging across the polished floor. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. I swung the torch on my mobile around, trying to see where the sound was coming from, but the store was too big, and the shadows were everywhere. Then I saw a group of mannequins at the far end of the aisle. They were all in different poses, like they were frozen mid-step. The one at the front seemed to be leaning forward slightly, its blank, featureless face tilted toward me. I backed away, trying to keep my eyes on them, but as soon as I turned to run, I heard the shuffling again, closer this time. I panicked. I bolted through the store, weaving between racks of clothes and displays, but no matter where I went, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. I stopped to catch my breath, crouched behind a counter, and dared to peek out. They were there. Close. Their rigid limbs contorted. One of them had its hand raised, almost like it was reaching for me. I ran again, heading for the main part of the mall. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of it all. Mannequins can't move, right? They're just plastic. But these weren't normal. They moved when I wasn't looking, and they were fast. The shuffling grew louder, echoing through the empty corridors. I could feel them, closing in, surrounding me. Every time I turned, there was another one, closer than before. I made it to the food court, thinking I could hide there, but that's when I realized it wasn't just the mannequins from the department store. They were everywhere, in every shop, every window display. All of them were facing me, their lifeless bodies arranged in twisted poses. I knew I had to get out. I sprinted for one of the emergency exits, praying it wasn't locked. I didn't dare look back, but I could hear them behind me, the scrape of their feet, the clatter of plastic limbs against the floor. The door gave way, alarm went off, and I stumbled out into the night. I didn't stop running until I was halfway home, my chest burning and my legs shaking. When I finally told my mates what happened, they just laughed and called me chicken for leaving.